I'm Donatella Maraschini. I would like to welcome you all to London South Bank University for what we hope to be a thought-provoking evening. The aim of tonight's screening and panel discussion is twofold. We would like to help raise awareness on an issue that is affecting millions of women around the world, but we are also very happy to support Oxfam and Mantis World in raising funds for a project that is hoping to improve social opportunities for some women in Pakistan. So I will pass you on to Prama Bradbaj, who is the CEO of Mantis World and the driving force behind this evening tonight, who would like to say a few words about the documentary that we are about to screen, and especially the project in Pakistan that you are all supporting by being here. So thank you, Prama.
Thank you, Donatella, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for putting in the time and effort to be here this evening. And just so we have an idea of who's actually here, could I just get a show of hands? How many people do we have from academia, sort of students or staff? Don't be shy. Okay, a few, great. How many people do we have who are activists in some form, researchers working in policy? Yeah. Some of you aren't sure. Okay, that's good. Do we have people from industry here? So the fashion, promotional trade industry. Brilliant. Okay. And do we have press? Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. I'll categorise the rest of you as just interested parties. So we'll shortly begin the screening of the Honour Diaries, and that'll follow with some incredible speakers on a panel discussion, which is facilitated by Shaminder Takhar, who is from the LSBU. After that, we will move upstairs to the mezzanine floor for some refreshments and the announcement of our raffle winners. So just a few words from me to put this evening into context before the screening. Why is a T-shirt company putting on an event like this? Well, in February I was on a sourcing trip in Pakistan, and what really struck me was the absence of women and girls in public life. And this is not just on the factory floors, but also generally in society. They just seemed mostly invisible. And this was very different from what I've seen when I've been in India or Bangladesh. So that got me to ask why. Now, of course, India and Bangladesh have their own issues with women's rights and representation. Of course, you probably all followed the stories of the rape and murder cases in India, and probably watched India's Daughter, some of you here. And indeed Bangladesh, well, that's also a Muslim state. So for me, I was questioning whether this is something to do with religion or something else. And it came to me that it was culture, and in particularly the culture of honour that determines how women should behave. Now, I'm no expert on this. I will leave that to the panellists who are experts. But what I find really striking is that we're not talking about a minority group. We're talking about 50% of the population. We're talking about women who don't have the same rights to social justice. And I work in my company. We predominantly employ women, and I'm sure all of us in this room have worked alongside hugely talented women. So for me, this is not just about women's rights. It's also thinking about the loss to society, the loss to the economy of this wasted pool of human resource. So that brought me to organise this evening, and Kalyani from Oxfam, who's here, agreed that we could support their project in Pakistan to get girls into schools, and she very helpfully walked me through what it takes to put on something like this, so thank you so much for that, Kalyani. And then I spoke to my friend Donatella, who managed to get us this wonderful space, and to LSBU very generously donated the space and the refreshments upstairs later on. So thank you LSBU, and particularly the deans. That's Professor Craig Barker, the Dean of the School of Law, and Social Sciences, and Professor Janet Jones, Dean of the School of Arts and Creative Industries. And to the wonderful events team here at LSBU, who are true professionals. Also thanks to our sponsors, Fashion Flow and their leisure wear suppliers in Ireland, who donated generously. Thank you also to my wonderful team at Mantis World, who have got behind this venture, often working in their own free time. And a special thanks to my friends and loved ones who have been so encouraging with their offers of help and just kept me going. So, now to the Honour Diaries. Since the film's launch in October 2013, Honour Diaries has been featured at 2 international film festivals, receiving the Interfaith Award at the St. Louis Festival, and it's been reviewed in publications such as the LA Times and aired multiple times on DirecTV. It has recently become available on Netflix and Amazon Prime, so if you want to share this film, it's quite easy for other people you want to share it with to watch it. The point of this film is to encourage and inspire dialogue on a myriad of issues. Various views are expressed, and some you may strongly agree or disagree with. Some scenes you may find harrowing, just a warning. But please keep an open mind as you watch this film so that you can try to identify with the women you are about to meet and understand their challenges. And just a reminder, if you haven't already, please turn off your mobile phones. And then, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the Honour Diaries.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce our panel for tonight's discussion. We're privileged tonight to have 4 panellists who, through their work, have tirelessly promoted social justice for girls and women. There may be some time for questions at the end, but please stay for the refreshments. So you'll have opportunity for networking and for asking further questions. I'd like to introduce Kalyani Gandhi Rhodes, who's the head of UK South Asia engagement at Oxfam, and her work is focused on supporting Oxfam's programs in South Asia, particularly countries where the UK-based South Asian communities have historical roots, ongoing interests and connections. So this is our first panellist. Our second panellist is Leyla at the end, Leyla Hussein. She's a psychotherapist and multi-award-winning campaigner on FGM and Gender Rights. She's received numerous awards, including Cosmopolitan Ultimate Campaigner Woman of the Year Award, and she writes for a range of journal outlets, including The Guardian. Our third panellist is Purna Sen. She's the Deputy Director of the Institute of Public Affairs at the LSE. She served as Head of Human Rights for the Commonwealth Secretariat and as Director for the Asia Pacific Programme at Amnesty International. And her work has included research publications and activism on violence against women, culture and human rights. And our fourth panellist is Yasmin Rehman. She's a freelance consultant and researcher. She's currently Justice and Strategy Manager with Women's Aid Federation, and she was Director of Partnerships and Diversity with the Metropolitan Police Service from 2004 to 2008. During this time, she was also the Deputy National Police Lead for Force, Marriage and Honour-Based Violence. She's an independent advisor for City of London Police and a trustee of the Centre for Secular Space. Now, the screening of the Honour Diaries provides an opportunity for an open debate on the subject of honour and to raise awareness in different societies. Before we begin the panel discussion, it is important to state that the views of the activists are expressed in the film are their own. We also have to acknowledge that honour-based violence occurs across the globe and is not limited to one culture or religion. Given that the activists in the film discuss the role of religion, culture and patriarchy, I would like to put to the panel the following questions. I told them what it was before. Thank you. To what extent can religion, culture and patriarchy be regarded as separate issues when discussing honour? Also, I'm sure that all our panellists have recommendations for bringing about social justice to the women and girls in honour-based communities. And to finish off on a positive note, as they did in the film, it would be interesting to find out your response, panellists, to if I could change one thing, it would be ... So the first speaker, Leyla.
I was hoping someone else would answer that question before I did. I mean, first of all, I mean, this is the second time I watched this documentary, and it's very difficult to actually speak afterwards, because I think I was sorry to the guy who was sitting next to me. I was trying not to sob right next to him. Not out of sadness, but out of anger, but at the same time being, you know, I had the privilege of knowing some of the women on that screen, and some of them I call them my friends. But for me, going back to that question, for me it's very difficult to dissect one without the other. And unfortunately, and I think again and again it came up in those stories, you know, where religion has, you know, numerous times is used to perpetuate violence against women and girls. And what always surprises me is it's always affecting the women and the girls, even though those who are passing on the messages are men. You know, I think sometimes we do need to challenge that. So for me, it's very difficult to dissect one from the other, but also we need to understand that there is a big difference between religion and culture. I mean, if I speak from my own experience, you know, I grew up between Saudi Arabia and Italy, so you can imagine the kind of childhood I had. But one thing they both had in common was patriarchy, because a lot of people might assume, you know, you live in the West, you know, freedom is, you know, right in front of your door. Yes, obviously you might not get killed, but patriarchy still exists, in a city like Milan, for example, where I grew up as a child. So for me, it's a very difficult question to really answer, because at the end of the day, whether we're discussing culture or religion, control, power, all of it stems from patriarchy. And I think for me, until we actually start challenging patriarchy, I think that's when we actually going to get, maybe you might get some positive solutions from you after, because, you know, after watching this, I feel like, oh God, you know, there's a lot to do. So really, I think, yeah, I'll leave it to other panelists to kind of answer, because it's really difficult to dissect one from the other from where I'm standing, and from my own experience, it's been quite difficult, because I grew up in a Muslim family, Somali family. I was never once told I was different because I was a girl, until I had FGM done to me. So for me, it was one of the first, and I always say FGM is actually the beginning of being reminded that you are different because you were born with a vagina. I mean, that's what we are guilty of. You know, the moment you're born with a vagina, you are guilty of something in this world, whether you're slut-shamed, whether you have to hold the honour of the family. And what I always find really interesting with the women that I see in my clinic, it's this idea of, as a woman, if I'm supposed to be the weaker sex, why am I holding the honour of the family? And if he's the stronger sex, why can't he help himself if he sees my naked neck? Because if he rapes me, that's my fault. Yeah. So really, we really need to challenge those attitudes. And I think, you know, as women, we really, not just as human beings, you know, it would be a crime, I would think, if we don't actually speak out against, if we don't challenge these, and if we don't have these discussions. I think it's important. Sorry, I kept saying I'm going to finish, but that's where I stand. You get my point, hopefully.
Leyla, if I could change one thing.
If I could change one thing, for me, God, you know, we live in a world where we're still controlled by politicians, which are mainly men. You know, in this country, I mean, but as one of the other women was speaking, you know, I use humour, and for me, that's the only way I survive, because if I start crying, then I'll never stop. And one of the things that I find really interesting, just living in the UK, only recently I found out women, we are taxed on tampons. So how the hell do I tackle FGM where I'm being taxed for being a woman? So really, if I'm going to change something, we need to go back to the foundation of how these decisions are made for me by people. I mean, the decisions made by somebody with a penis made the decision for my, you know, obviously, you know, having periods is such a luxury, apparently. You know, having mood swings and cramps, you know, such bliss week. You know, so for me, if I'm going to change something, we actually have to go back to the foundation of how in the world that we're living in as women, until that happens, I really can't even tackle FGM anymore if I'm being taxed for having periods. Yeah. So we have a big problem. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
It's interesting the reaction that I had. I'm a Muslim, I'm of Muslim heritage. Part of my family from Pakistan. So there was lots of reactions going on as I was watching that film, because it's not the Islam I recognise, it's not the culture I recognise, it's not even the country that I recognise. And I think you must understand something of the context of Pakistan and the rest of the Muslim world, the Islamisation of the Muslim world, which is a political force. It's not about religion, this is about power and control of women, yes, but also of men. It's about keeping particular men down and certain men holding power, so there was that reaction. And let's not fool ourselves that the West is so wonderful. 2 women a week die in this country as a result of domestic violence. How many women every day get raped? We've had the case recently of Oxford University failing to protect women and girls who were being assaulted on their campuses, and that's just one case. Let's not underestimate the levels of violence against women and girls within Western societies. This is an international, a global phenomena that we all have to deal with. And we may justify it through culture, through cultural expression. We may justify it through religious practice. We've moved from multiculturalism to multi-faithism, where we've given men the power to speak and be the owners and the maintainers of culture, to tell our politicians what cultures from specific parts of the world look like. We've then replaced that with multi-faithism, where we've given men, again, the power to say what a particular faith is and how it should be practiced. I do not wear the hijab. I wouldn't stop anybody else wearing it, but it's not part of the Islam that I grew up with. I did not grow up with an Islam that says you have to marry a particular person or you'll be forced into it. These notions of honour, yes. Notions of honour around status, around aspiration. We've heard a lot of that in the past few weeks. About trying to be better and to strive to be better, but certainly not honour in this sense of complete and utter control from a personal perspective. But that doesn't mean that my life has not been touched by women and girls who have been controlled in those sorts of ways within my own family and beyond. The other thing I quickly want to say is, this is not new. This is my 30th year of working on women's issues. Hanana Siddiqui of Southall Black Sisters and myself were talking one day, and we worked out that the first time we dealt with a forced marriage or honour case was 1985. It is now 2015. This is also not just about those people over there. Think about travellers. Think about our own royal family. I've often sort of said, look at Charles and Diana, but even look at William and Kate and the kind of things that we expect of the future Queen of this country, and how she will behave and how she will conduct herself. Look across at Michelle Obama and what is expected of the First Lady and how she must be. They're all constrained within norms of acceptability. So this is cross-cultural, it's cross-national, it's cross-religious, and absolutely patriarchy is at the root of it. Just to end, the one thing that I would change, let's have a commitment to actually tackling violence against women and girls. Let's not do it in this piecemeal fashion. Let's actually have a commitment. We've known about Saudi Arabia for as long as I've been on this earth. We've known what's going on in Iran since 1979 at least. We know what goes on with women and girls in this country. There are bodies of evidence, of research, there's practice, there's women's activists all over the world speaking up and speaking out. When are our politicians going to actually do something about it? Sign the checks so that we can get those support services in place to keep women and girls safe, to actually fund it and to stop kind of cutting back and cutting back and cutting back. This is fundamental stuff. This is about people's lives. If we can enter into wars where we just think there may be weapons of mass destruction, why can't we protect women from men who are weapons of mass murder? Thank you.
think it's very difficult to separate the three concepts you gave us, Shaminder. In talking about honour, we can separate them in an analytical space, and we can separate them in talking about what role they have socially, but in terms of honour, I think it's very difficult to dissect them, as you've both said. I would say that there is a culture of patriarchy that is global, and that's really what we need to understand and unpick. And the cultural expression of that can vary. That inequality, those systems and structures which benefit men at the cost of women are global, they're international, they cut across space and they cut across time. So we're not new to this, as Yasmin said, it's been going on a lot more than the 30 years you've been involved in, the 6 years that I've been involved in this. But it's an incredibly resilient, strong set of structures that can morph, that can change, that can come back after we think we've beaten it on one front. It's there as an incredibly resilient, powerful structure throughout all our contexts. What I think has happened over the last 15, 20 years is particularly a religiousization of public space, public policy and public discourse, so that before it was more acceptable, more possible to critique religious practice, it's now become less easy to do so, less possible to do so without condemnation. So that cultural respect has become spaces of cultural taboo, a religious taboo, where we cannot talk about things that need to be named but also need to be challenged. And I think what's happened is that we've had a problematic joining of culture and a religion in a way that is unhelpful analytically. So while we can say they are related in honour, I think we have to understand them as distinct. And that has happened. I know Raheel was saying this is a complex problem, but it has happened at a time there has been growing Islamophobia. And I think if we don't name that, I think we slip into this problem that I've seen for many years in many places where the problem is bounded in an understanding of Islam and the other. And what was said in the film is that it's not contained in the practice of Islam. But Islam has to be named. And one thing that disappointed me in the film that I will say is that there wasn't mention of other Muslim women's organising around these issues. For example, women living under Muslim laws, sisters in Islam who are operating and organising from within those spaces, which is an incredibly difficult place to occupy and from which to fight. So I think those are things we need to think about. And I'd like also to acknowledge what Raheel said in the film, is that it's not just in Islamic context that we have these things happening. I first came across it with Rana in the film in Jordan when I was working there about 15, 16 years ago, and learnt about specifically the area around honour then, but had worked on FGM about 25 years ago in this country when I first came across it. But I made a point of looking at how widespread this sort of honour schema is, this honour culture. And I published something a few years ago now on honour killings and crimes in India, and how very strong they have become and how prevalent they've become in certain parts of northern India. Certainly not contained within Islamic communities at all. In fact, most of the ones I was looking at were Hindu. And they were about the same problematic, the same central problematic, which is that honour, collective honour, resides in the bodies of women, that women's sexuality is a problem that people don't know how to deal with, and so it's boxed up into nice, tidy packages, and if women step outside those packages, they cause a problem for the whole collective, whether it's a family, a community, a tribe, or a religion, or a village. And that problem can be, and this is for me the distinction about honour, is that honour can be either reclaimed or the stain that it causes can be cleansed away and it can be erased, and that's why killings matter. So you can, if a woman steps out of line by going to college when she's been told not to, or by looking at a man when she wasn't supposed to be out, then she can be kept at home. So it can be contained. Alternatively, it can be erased by erasing the carrier of that dishonour. So it's quite a complex system, I think, analytically. But it's not an Islamic-only problem. It's a problem that is much more global. And I think to be able to deal with this, one of the things that's most important is to understand, as Yasmin says, the problem of violence against women, which is what we're naming in specific ways, is an absolutely international one. It happens here not only in the 2 women killed a week, but it happens in child abuse, It happens in rape on campus. It happens in, some people were saying, the sex industry. It happens all around us. And to focus only on the other and to deny our own, I think, mitigates against helpful conversations and alliances that are absolutely essential to see us move forward. I hate the questions on what is the one thing you would change, but I'm going to give it a go. And I think the one thing that I would change, and it sort of in a way, I'm saying it because I think it captures everything else we have to do, is to recognise women as fully human. And until we do that, we're not going to deal with the other problems. Fully human, so not only important in the fashion industry and economic use of their time and their talents, but fully human in terms of their rights and their dignity, our rights and our dignity. So that the rights that have been fought for so many years are actually meaningful to women and actually make a difference in their lives as they construct them and build the lives of their children.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd just like to thank the organisers for supporting the work of Oxfam that we do globally around women's rights, particularly Prama when she came and has worked with us extensively around the work we're doing in galvanizing women's movements in liberal societies to support our work in the developing countries that we're working in. But I think what really interested me when this film was put on the table, it was a reflection of, for many of you who probably know or don't know what Oxfam does, and we are a global organization, we're working in over 130 countries. The fundamental crux of our work and one of the fundamental barriers to our work around dealing with poverty is the inequality of women. And the inability for us to break that status quo, for us to actually be able to stand up as an organization, as part of a movement of organizing and say we're able to address material poverty, which we are not successfully able to address because there is a significant problem in the way women are continuing to be treated. And it's a growing problem. It's not a diminishing problem. And that has been for us a very fundamental challenge in the 70 years of our work. So although we have programs and we deal with emergencies and we work across the globe, the fundamental point that we continually face is an escalating level of violence against women, not a decreasing. And that's an escalating violence, be it whether we intervene with education, be it whether we intervene with institutional laws, with campaigns, with forcing the state to pass legislation that has acts on domestic violence, or even in subtle ways trying to work with states that advocate and legitimize this, be it through religion or otherwise. But it's a fundamental problem for us. So, and I'm sure this discussion will come up today, is that in addressing women's inequality, and for us in addressing women's inequality in terms of giving what you said, Purna, is women the ability to make the choices equally as citizens. And that in our role comes in through education, livelihoods, the ability to have political participation, the ability to sort of hold positions, to gain and hold positions of power in their societies. The dilemma we're facing is this question that you've posed is, it's an attitudinal problem. Where is culture, religion, and patriarchy? Why are attitudes not changing? And what is influencing these attitudes? Which of these components that we are in different ways, or the partners we're working with, how are we influencing these? Whether we're fighting it from a religious lens, or we're fighting it from a lens of inequality because the state is in power. And that's where we're trying as an organization to understand, and ourselves to ask questions. It's not just enough looking at the problem singularly. It's looking at it socially, and how can we work with entire communities. So this film really threw up a lot of questions for us, and as just the organizer we work with, is how can we do this? And that is a really big question which we haven't answered. How do you change attitudes? And that's what, if you ask me the final, the question, what would I change? And I would reflect what Purna, you were also saying, is the attitude that doesn't value a woman fundamentally. The attitude does not value a woman fundamentally. I would want to change that. Why is a woman who is so critical to the sustenance of a family, in the name of honor or in the name of violence, devalued so hugely that she's denied an education? I was in India a few weeks ago and talking about drought-ridden communities. First thing they do is they deny the girl child food. Female infanticide. Why do we not value? So the whole question comes into play. then how do we as a collective then, as women's activists and academics and citizens, work together to try and address that? So I suppose that I would like that discussion brought up today. And I hope I've tried to answer those questions. But overarching, I'd really like to thank the audience for making time to come today and participate in this, in viewing the film, but also giving us a space to actually do what somebody in the film said, is not be politically correct. But actually, as women, ask the hard questions, and men. What needs to be done? What can we do together? So thank you very much for making time on a Tuesday evening.
I've been afforded the luxury now of about 12 or so minutes for questions. So, first one.
One of the issues explored in the film was the sort of lack of freedom and forced marriages. I'm interested to know the panelists' views on why, for example, now in the UK, so many young girls have willingly, by choice, chosen to travel to for example, Syria, and where somewhere that it's very apparently where you don't have freedom and choice.
Who would like to answer that question?
Do you want my version? I think as panelists, I think we've all said, just because we live in the West, we shouldn't have this idea that we actually do live in a free world for women.
Yeah.
And I think just another thing to add on, if you look at the issue around women and girls globally, there's nowhere in place where women are safe or they can be free to travel where. So this idea, sometimes I've seen headlines where they've said, oh, these girls chose to. No. Actually, number one, a lot of these girls were children and they were groomed. There's a grooming process involved in something like this. So for me, we can't just sit here and say, oh, because they lived in a free world, they chose to actually have this, to go travel to places like ISIS. Actually, if you look at the environment these girls living in the first place, you'll understand why they made those particular choices. And just something else I would like to add on to in terms of freedom and choices. People constantly say to me, Leyla, why do you always criticise this culture of design of vagina in the UK, for example? Because people say it's a choice for women who live in the West. How is it a choice? Because I teach in schools like PhD classes, and when I hear a white English girl telling me, 15-year-old who says to me, I'm saving up money so I can have my labias trimmed, okay? And when you actually ask her why she wants to do that, it's because her boyfriend said they look like ham. My obviously initial reaction is there are men out there who appreciate your hams. But the idea is, why is it one particular... Again, it's going back to that question. There's this idea, girls who live in the West have this freedom to choose. Actually, they don't, because those two girls, one is being told, because she's from Africa, me being a Muslim, my family was barbaric, but she had a choice. Actually, again, it goes back to that patriarchal system, again, where women are controlled, that's when the power is, and there's a grooming process involved. Even when I hear a lot of women say to me, Leyla, I wanted FGM done, but actually, in the counselling process that we go through, they find out actually they were led to believe that's what they were supposed to, because if she didn't have FGM done to her, then she would be stigmatised by the community. So it's a grooming process, and we have to remember, a lot of these violences happens when language is so important when we have these discussions. A lot of the violences happen when they're children. These are children we're talking about. So I really hate the word marriage when we're talking about children. I really do, because when we say marriage, we're making it okay for some reason. So I think, using the right language is also important. I think for me, when we talk about children, there's no choice. And so just, sorry, I went a bit too long.
There's something about what's happening here and what's happening abroad that needs further examination than we've had. Yes, there's grooming going on, absolutely, undoubtedly, and they are girls, they're children. But they're also, a lot of them, alienated from what's happening around them, I have to say. Certainly where I live, there's been a number of young men who've gone to Syria and been killed. and all of those young men had histories of racist abuse at school, on the streets, and where they lived in their communities. And they were moved from one house to another, into streets where it was known that there was racist families and racist practice going on. If the alternative to that is something where you feel you have a role and a meaning, and you can make a contribution, I can see why it's appealing. But I don't dismiss at all. I agree completely with what Leyla's saying about problematizing the idea of choice. Choice is not a free-floating, wonderful thing that everybody has access to. It's constrained, and it's made in the absence of alternatives in many ways. Labia trimming is one, but breast implants that every young woman was doing about 10 years ago.
Now it's the butt.
Now it's the butt. But there are ways in which young women are taught to conform from a very early age, and they're taught the terms on which they are allowed to belong to the group that matters to them. For some women, it's all these bits of plastic surgery. For young girls, it's a whole host of other things. For young girls who don't have surgery, it's getting plastered before you go out at night. It's what everybody does. It's the way you fit into the crowd. I'm not saying that excuses it, but I think it helps us to understand it. I also just want to say, I'm not sure we've got time to do this now, but I don't agree that attitudes haven't changed. I think attitudes have changed hugely. What my grandmothers had in their lives when they were married at 12 and 13 and started having children at 15. My mother married at 17, had her first child at 19. I got married and divorced within a year at 20 and 21, and had children without being married, and I don't know my kids will. I think that's a massive change that we have to acknowledge. I don't think it's a totally bleak history or future, but I think it's a massive push and pull dynamic that's going on. And we have victories, and we must hang on to them, but we also have massive defeats, and we must come back from them and keep going.
I suppose what we're saying is, it's the numbers game it comes to. For us, the successes are overshadowed by the growing, by the sheer numbers.
Don't.
I mean, like you.
Don't be overshadowed.
I had a child before, out of marriage, and through my whole family, which were totally educated, and said, how can you choose to have a child without being married? And they only came around to accepting that because I was having a boy child. And so this completely, it happens in our own. So it's I suppose it's really what we're saying is that it's really hard to weigh up. It's not a clean cut black and white, where you'll have changing attitudes, but you'll have barriers as well at the same time in a very simple situation.
Right, there was a hand.
To suggest that there is, as some religious leaders have done in this country, to suggest that there is one Sharia is a lie, basically. And I've been heavily involved in challenging Universities UK around gender segregation, but also the Law Society around its guidance, its Sharia guidance on inheritance. And that was my point about multi-faithism. It's when we have powerful men who say this is what religion is, and then those who are not from that faith accepting their word without any questioning, without even looking across the Muslim world to see how Sharia is practiced. It really boils my blood. It really does. Sharia law shouldn't even enter in. I'm not a legal pluralist, because what I think we're creating is a two-tier system in the context of legal aid cuts, but we're basically saying to minority women, on one hand you don't integrate, and we've got a problem with that, but on the other hand we don't bother coming to our courts because you've got your courts over there. It's just such a mixed message. We should all be equal before the law. It's a fundamental tenet of our democracy. We should all have free and open access to the law.
I might have respond to the one you asked about women, mothers, sisters, often being seen as the perpetrators, of various inequalities of women. And sometimes I call it the mother-in-law syndrome. That you see, especially, I coming from South Asian background, and always the question is, why is it the mother-in-law burning the bride? Why is the mother-in-law, treating the young, the daughter? So it's what you said earlier also. partly it's to do with conditioning, that we are brought up in a particular way that it's not just honor but conditioning. And then the second part of it is also that there's very little space for women to sort of articulate dissent. So if you're brought up to think that this is the only way you can act, you may want, and it's very hard to dissent, and because of stigma and the sort of efforts you've got to go through family and social kind of barriers through it. And also the film also brought up, and partly through some of the work I do or we do, that if women can be collectivized in communities and been given that space, it's not about teaching them. I think no mother really wants to kill her daughter or burn, or it's not a natural tendency to do that. The space is created to dissent, and men also worked with to work with women, say, my wife can do this. I'm not saying it's his permission giving, but there has to be some way for them to work together. It's not just the women have to be standing strong, but the men have to also stand strong against their own peers and their own communities. There is a way forward, but it's really hard to. I think people find it really hard when you see pictures of midwives, doing FGM and mothers holding their daughters down. And people just say it's a really tough one to actually try and give you a concrete answer on. I mean, you'll definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just following on from that comment, I mean, this is a question people constantly ask me, because FGM is organised by women for other women, but obviously from my own experience, I was actually mutilated by a medical male doctor, so because I had the privilege to have such service. However, whenever I hear men, especially when I challenge men in the practicing community, I like to call it practicing community because I've now stayed away from calling FGM for a particular group as a practicing community. And the men always say to me, well, the mother, chose this for her child. And I'm like, that's interesting, you picked her name, you picked what school she went to, you picked what man she's going to marry. Inconveniently that day, you're not available to intervene and actually say something violent about to happen to my child. Because one thing I've noticed, especially with these particular communities, whenever the daughter does really well, who takes credit for it? The father. The father, yeah. She wears jeans and she's slut-shamed. Who gets shamed? The mother. Yes. So there is, these women feel they need to be in this position, and I think it was said in the film, is to survive and to have a status in the family, because having a status is the only way she's going to survive. And just one more thing, my ex-mother-in-law was actually quite lovely. Just saying.
I'm not saying all
she's actually my ex-mother-in-law. I mean, we're great friends. So I like to point out not all mother-in-laws are evil.
So now on behalf of LSBU and Mantis World, thank you so much. And I'll see you upstairs in the mezzanine. Thank you.